Clear.
Okay. The mitzvah of Avos Hagerim, we did last time, the time before last, we talked about Avos Yisrael, and this is HaMitzvah Hasheva B'Mosayim, Ish Zivonu Lahov Es Hagerim, for Amra Yis'ale V'Havtem Es Hagerim. So we'll continue, we'll talk, just to get an idea of what's going on here. So the Rambam Kilu has an apology. V'af al pi shehu nichnas b'zeh im Yisrael b'yom v'afterach k'moicha. It's like one mitzvah v'afterach k'moicha. Shezeh hager ger tzedek. And since this ger is a ger tzedek, he's also a Jew. So he's reacha. Abomination nichnas b'torasenu, since he came into our Torah, Hosif Okel Ava v'Yichaloi Mitzvah Le'Sepes. The Rebbeinu Shalom gave a separate mitzvah. K'moi she'osa b'azhoras b'azhor boino. It's the same thing like boino. Shomu le'soine es am Yisrael, le'soine es am Yisrael, v'yoma v'ger le'soine. Okay, is boy miloshen hagmor b'mitzia shechayom noas hager mishum le'soinu ish es am Yisrael mishum v'ger loy soinu. So he says the same way there you see it mitzia, but you can extrapolate that the same thing should be here. Cain, gam Cain, onu chayovim v'havosay mishum v'afterach kamoicho. ומשום ואהבתם es הגר. וזה מבוא, אין ספק בו. And then he says, ואין יודע עודו ממי שמונה המצווה שסיקל זה, we'll see what the word sickle means, that was makalkal or confused this. And there's no one. Okay, we'll see if there was anyone or no one. And then he says, בו במג'ש בארו שוקל ציוונו על הגר, כמו שציוונו על עצמו. Yis'ale. The same way he's mitzvah on himself. Oma v'ahavta is Hashem Elokecha. V'oma v'ahavta misager. So let's try to do this very slowly, and let's see what happens. The Rambam here is bringing a separate mitzvah, meaning a mitzvahs of mitzvah to love a ger tzedek. And this mitzvah, this new mitzvah, is a separate mitzvah, and it's not b'chlal v'afterach kamoicha. That's what it is. V'afal pi shu nichnas b'zeh im Yisrael b'om v'afterach kamoicha. Shezeh hager ger tzedek, avu b'nei shenichnas b'tzoraseinu v'yisrael mitzvah. So the question is really, one should ask, that since we know that according to Shorish Chi, that a mitzvah shenichpeles is l'tzorach chizuk, and it's not nimne as a separate mitzvah, this l'chayra is a kefal. And so the simple answer is that even though it's very true, very clear that a mitzvah shenichpala is only counted as one mitzvah, but this is not a mitzvah shenichpelas, because it was only doubled as far as a small set of individuals, gerin. And maybe let's flip it. And Adarabah, that maybe there's a new rule in Minyan HaMitzvos, that if you have a mitzvah which is on a large group, and the Torah says the mitzvah again, legabe, as far as a very specific, a smaller, a subset, so then by definition, this is not nichbal, because we nichbal, it should be the whole group. The fact that it took a separate group out of the set made into a separate mitzvah. And that, we'll see, is why the Rambam wrote Oino, because Oino, there's a lav as far as the whole Klal Yisrael, and the Torah repeats the lav in a small subset called Gerim. And there, the Gemara Bava Metzia says explicitly that Yechayiv Mishum this and Chayiv Mishum that. It means that it's two separate mitzvahs. So Mamela, we learn from the Gemara Bava Metzia this klal that if you have a mitzvah as far by a large set, and the mitzvah is repeated by a small subset, so then there are two mitzvahs, minyan mitzvahs. Okay. So that's the Rambam. So then there's some clarity what the Rambam's doing. He says that they're two separate mitzvahs, and he uses oino as a proof that this rule exists because of the Gemara Metzia. And then I can imagine, since it's a new rule, which is pretty obvious in the Bava Metzia, then we can't imagine anyone denying this rule. Maybe something like that. V'zeh mavu ain't safek boy. Now, that is point number one. Point number two, but if there is a separate mitzvah, minyan mitzvahs, so one would expect that there's a new chiyuv chal here. There's something different. There's something added. There's no reason that the Torah should add a new mitzvah if you're anyway chayiv mishum avos hager to Yisrael. And especially so, since the Rambam holds that mitzvahs nifrodes are dependent upon inyanim sheinim, so there has to be a new inyan over here in avos hager, which is not in avos Yisrael. And in ger, you have both of them. You have the general mitzvah of avos Yisrael, and you have the peculiar mitzvah of avos hager. L'cheira, that's what you should say. The question is, what is this? What is this new chiyuv? So l'cheira, the Ram is answering this question when he writes, "Chayisif hokel yis'ahabo v'yichid loy mitzvah neisefes." A chayisif abo, that avos hager is different than avos kol Yisrael, and there's a teisefes abo that's not in Stam Yisrael, and that's a separate mitzvah. And therefore, in sync with this approach, the Rambam says the B'Rov Midrashos Beru she'akel tzivonu hager k'mo she'tzivonu al atzmo yis'alo Omar v'ahavta eis Hashem Elokecho v'Omar v'ahavtem es hager. this means what the Ram is trying to do is to mevaya what the Tesefes Ava is. And there's in this Tesefes Ava, it's a dimion to Avas Hashem. But that, he adds something by explaining what this Ava is. But on the other hand, it makes it completely confusing. It's Darshani. How can you compare the love of another human being to the love of God? So it's absolutely clear that the Avas Hashem is different than Ava of a human being or to a human being. The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Yud Halacha Gimel, v'keitzad ha'ava horuyehu she'avas Hashem ava gedol yiseira azim yoid ad shetei nafsho kshura b'avas Hashem v'nim s'shoyge b'tomid kilu chayli ava she'ein daitoi pnuya me'avas oisei v'hu shoyge b'tomid bein b'shiftei bein b'kumoi bein b'shor shu'oicha v'shoyser Yesim izeh tiye avos Hashem b'leiv oyavov shoygim bo tamid k'mo shetzivonu b'chol lavo b'chol nafshecho v'hu sheshleim oma derech Moshe k'cholos ava onim b'chol she'ashirim moshel hu le'inyan zeh. So, Rabbi say that this what is the dimion? What is the comparison? What does the Ram have in mind to compare Avos Hager to Avos Hashem? So we said when we were learning the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael that the Rambam is of the opinion that it's not to love his fellow man as he loves himself, but the Torah doesn't say v'ahavto es reacha kamocha, v'ahavto lo reacha kamocha. He wants for his friend what he wants for himself, b'mono b'gufay. He wants hatzlochas chaveira, b'mono b'gufay, because he wants hatzlocha la'atzmai. But however, mitzvahs avos Hashem is not that you want for God when you want to be crazy, but you love God. Similarly, the mitzvah is to love the ger. It's not abo gedolo yiseira shoyge batomid, but the same way we said that in Avos, in Avos Yisrael, it's not to love the Jew be'etzem, but it's to want for him. But here in ger, it's to love the ger, and in that way, it's doing it to Avos Hashem. And that we see in this V'yohavto Eis Hashem Elokecho, V'ahavtem Es Hager, and in Stam Yisrael, it's V'ahavto Li Reacho Kamoicha. This you see in the Rambam in two places, two other places. You see it in Mishnah Torah, and we see it in Tshuvas Rambam. The Rambam Mishnah Torah in Hilchos Deis in Perek Vav Halacha Dalet. He writes, Abbas Hager, v'chulei, Tzivo al Abbas Hager, kmo shetzivo al Abbas atzmoi, shenema v'yohavto eis Hashem Elokecho. HaKodesh Baruch Hu atzmoi oyev gerim, shenema v'oyev ger. So you understand that you can't, you see, by a Jew with another Jew or a ger, you could have said that the Jew wants for the ger what he wants for himself. But if, as the Rambam says, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu oyev es hager, and the same way that God loves the ger, you should love the ger. So if that's the oyev ger, lo says loy lechem b'simra. The Ram doesn't quote the whole pasuk, but it's this. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu atzmoi oyev gerim. So what's he trying to tell you? So there's some dimion to this. Now you understand yourself that when you're talking about the Rebbeinu Shem loving gerim, it's absolutely nimblepet to say the Rebbeinu Shem wants for the ger what he wants for himself. It's crazy. It means there's an ahava be'etzim. So if we say that God loves the ger and we also have to love the ger, it's ahava be'etzim. So now next, so you have to ask why, what's the hisofa over here? That the reason why it's mavur, the tshuva, is in the Medrash Tanchuma. You look at it in Vayikra Siman Beis, that the tam shono oiv mesager ava yisera is because the Rebbeinu Shem loves them, as we find the Medrash, and the Rambam's using this Medrash to explain why we have ava yisera. But it's an ava be'etzim. It's not that we want for the ger what we want for ourselves. In Chuvas Rambam, and here I'll read the whole thing because I'm not sure if everyone has it or whatever it is. You'll see the nuances which you might not have seen anyway. The Rambam in Siman Chuvas Rambam Siman Tov Mem Ches Da shechiva shechivoso chivosonu hatera al hagerim g'dolehi v'al hagerim tzivo be'avo rabo hamesur l'leiv avo rabo hamesur l'leiv ואהבתם es hager v'goymer כמו שציוונו לאהוב את שמו ואהבת את השם אלוקיך והקדוש ברוך הוא בכבודו אויב גר שנאמר אויב גר לא עשית לו לחם ושמלה וזה שקורא לכו כסיל עמו גדול הוא וזה שקורא לכו כסיל תמו גדול הוא that there's a certain ger, Zavadia ger, that someone called him a ksil. And Adam sheiniach oviv umoladeto, a person who left his father and his birthplace, umalchus amoy, and his whole the community and the country that he always identified with. V'yodam anatuya, v'haven, The haven be'ain liboy is certainly havona yisera ubo v'nidbak be'uma zo shehi hayoim lemisav goy eved moishlim v'hikir. It's everyone hates the Jew. And certainly today also that's it. V'hikir v'yoda shedosan das emes v'tzedek v'haven dalka Yisrael v'yoda shekol hadosais genuvais midosam. Every religion is stolen from the Jewish religion. Ze moisif v'ze gereya ze meshane v'ze mechaze u'mechaper al Hashem dvorim asher loikein ze hoires yisredes v'ze medaber tapuchais v'hiki hakol v'rodef achrei Hashem v'ovad b'derech HaKodesh Baruch Hu אחרי השם, ועובר בדרך הקודש, ועובר בדרך הקודש, ונכנס תחת כנפי השכינה, ונסעפק בעפר רגלי מוישה רבנו, רבן של כל הנביאים, עולב השלום. וקופץ במצווסו, ונוסר ליבוי, לקובו, לאור, באור החיים, ולהלויס במיילס המלוכים, ולשמוח, ולסענג, בשמחס הצדיקים, והשליך העולם הזה מליבוי, ולפונה אלוהים, ושוטה שקם חוזר, מי שזוהי מעלוסוי, כסיל יקרו. How could this guy have called you a ksil? חלילה לך, לא כסיל קורא השם, שמחו, אלא משכיל, ומבין, ופיקח, והילך, נכריחס, תלמידו של אברהם אבינו, שהניח אבויסו מולדתו, ונוטה אחרי השם. ומי שברך את אברהם רבכו, ונוסן לו יסחורוי בעולם הזה, ולעולם הבא, הוא יבורכו יסחו, וייתן לך שכוחו כלוי, בעולם הזה, ולעולם הבא, ויארך יומךו, עד שתרא במשפטי השם, בכל הדוסי, ויזכה, איסחו, ויזכר איסחו, לירו איס בכל הנחום איס והסילוס ישראל, והוי הטבע הוא אשר ייטב להשם עמנו, what Moshe Rabbeinu said to Yisrael, והיטבנו לך, כי השם דיבר טוב על ישראל. Moshe b'remayim b'tzal. So, you know, something's going on here. It's not just the Poshet Deloitza Atzlocha. And I assume that the Ram was married because of the mitzvah of Abbas again. We find something like this in Medrash Tehillim, in Mizbah Kuf Memvov, Kach Omar Kodesh Baruch Hu, Tov v'gedol tzorach ani lahachzik lager, she'inich mishpachtei, Tov v'gedol ani tzorach lahachzik lager, she'inich mishpachtei, u'beis oviv, u'bo elai, lochein ani mitzav ve'olov, ואהבתם es hager. The Ram V'chera is reflecting this Medrash in Tehillim. V'ger lo yisayne. L'chein nemar Hashem shomer es gerim. So this also you see, here also, when we get to Oino, this case of Oino, where the Torah said it by a broad set and a small subset, and here it's also mitzvah nefredes. And l'chayr is nitosef that there's there's a new mitzvah and something new by Onos Hager. But we have a raya over here from the Bava Metzia. The question is, but what is different over here? So in Minyan HaMitzvos, the Ram has an answer. The Ram in HaMitzvos in Lois Aseh Reish Nun Beis. He she's hilnu mehonis ger b'dvorim gam ken ubesifro shloi toim aloi emesh v'yiso eved avodah zora v'achshav nichnasto tachas kampi ashchina. So the lav is to be maskir, to tell him the background, to remind him the background of where he came from. So it's not kef alav, because I know Israel is tam to make him feel bad. But here, the oino is about his kesher to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The oino about his Hashem ger. The oino is to say that ger is doing. The oino is doing exactly what the Rambam says he shouldn't do in his tshuva. This is good in Minyan HaMitzvos, but Mishnah Torah, if you look in Hilchos Mechira, Perek Yud Daled, Halacha Tezvav, until Yud Zayin, you get the impression that the topic of the lav of Onos Hager is lav b'dafka about his background. And if that's so, we have no clue of what's the taste for this lav. Now, you could ask the question why the Rambam quotes the pasuk "V'ahavtem es hager," and there's another pasuk in Parshas. With this pasuk is in Parshas Ekev, and there's a pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim which he doesn't quote, and it's before Ke'ezrach mikem yiyeh lachem hager hago itchem v'ahavtem lo kamoicha. The Avodas HaMelech in Uchos Deis Perek Vav Halacha Daled asked this question, and the Smag, in essence, Siman Yud, quotes the pasuk v'ahavtem lo kamoicha as another makor for this mitzvah. So the two answers one could give over here. That the pasuk in v'ahavta loy kamoicha, it's with a lamed. It's not s. And we want to love B'etzem, and that l'chayra has to be v'alav es, which is v'ahavtem es hager, which is the pasuk in Ekev. Another answer you can give is that the pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim, the whole upshot of the pasuk is to be mashva ger to Yisrael. Ke'ezrach mikem yiyeh lochem hager hago itchem v'ahavtem lo kamoicha. So the upshot of the pasuk is that you shouldn't deal with a ger less than another Jew. Because also Bnei Yisrael are gerim, ki gerim a yisem be'eretz Mitzrayim, a mitzvah beger, who teisefes avo, as we explained before. And this is not what's going on over here in in the pasuk in Kedoshim. The problem over here is if the kasha of the Avodas HaMelech is a question, I'm not sure that we have an answer. Because if you take, in other words, if you assume by itself that if you have a general, a broad set, and then you have the Torah repeats it as a subset, Hein and a mitzvah Aseh, Hein and a lav, by definition, separate mitzvah, then the pasuk in Kedoshim should be a separate mitzvah, if whether it's ve'afta loy kamocha, ve'afta esager, or it's ko'ezrach kager, by definition, it be separate mitzvah. So that's a problem, and that has to be dealt with. Okay, let's continue. Now, let's go on, and let's go back. Shezeh hager ger tzedek. So it means, according to the Rambam, it's very clear that the ger of the subject of this mitzvah is a ger tzedek, and that's what it is. And the Tesis Abo is Shenichnas al Tachas Kanfi Ashchina, which is only by ger tzedek. The Chinuch adds that this mitzvah includes someone who is not in his birthplace. And he's a ger, he's a sojourner, he's not in his place. The Chinuch, Sefer Chinuch, in mitzvah Tov Lamed Aleph, v'yeshnon lumoid min ha-mitzvah hayikora hazeis l'rachem al odom shu be'ir she'enoi eretz moladetoi u'mokoi mishpachas avoiso v'loi na'avir olov haderech b'motzonu oisoi yichidi v'rachakoi me'olov oizu but he's not close to anyone who can help him. And he is a person, the person is not very moladatoy, away from all his makira. He is a person that needs help. So the Chofetz Chaim takes this very seriously. In Sefer Mitzvah Kotzer, Mitzvah Say Samach Aleph, he says Mitzvah Say Le'al V'Sager, Shenema V'Ahavtem V'Sager. U'Pirish Ger Kan Hu Shebo Me'eretz Acheres. U'Me'ir Acheres Lo Go Itonu. U'Mikol Shekein Ger Shenizgayer. Also ich glaube, der Chofetz Chaim. L'cheira, there's a riot to the chinuch because the pasuk says "Va'avtem es hager ki gerim yisem beretz Mitzrayim." So what's ki gerim yisem beretz Mitzrayim? What does it mean? It means you were also uprooted from your birthplace. So what does it to do with the mitzvah of ger, of gerus, of tachas kampei Shechina? The Jews in Mitzrayim were not misguided. They were misguided afterwards. Since they were Mitzrayim, they came out. It's a very strange thing. If you learn at the Ram, you have to do a lot of work. I'm not sure what you do. ואהבתם es hager ki gerim hayisem be'eretz Mitzrayim. It's a problem. It's an Indian of Shalom Mekoimot. The Chafetz Chaim seems to take this seriously. He doesn't quote. I don't know if he quotes the Chinuch, but this din he's ready to assume. The Minchas Chinuch takes a different approach, and he assumes that the kavanah of the Chinuch over here is not halacha, but it's derech musa. The Minchas Chinuch in Ois Aleph there, in this mitzvah Tofel Amid Aleph, Umashe Kosovav Machaber L'Rachim Al Kol Odom V'Chulei Hu Miderech HaMusa Aval Eino B'char HaMitzvah Rak Gesh Nizgayim V'Nichas Takas HaShchina Kanfei HaShchina V'zeh Hoshet. So according to this, the chinuch was like the Rambam, but the psukim in Kigeim Yisrael Eretz Yisrael need a lot of work. Now, let's continue. Avo mipnei shenichnas b'toraseinu. So what's mipnei shenichnas b'toraseinu? So that's the Ibn Tibin in Ibn Iyov, Liyoise Nichnas Bados. It's talking about religion. In Kapach, Nichnas Mechodosh Be'emuno B'das Yisrael. But what this means is the Rambam in Hilchos Deis, Perek Vav, Halacha Daled, Avos Hager Shebo B'nichnas Tachas Kanfei HaShchina. Now, see, the question only is, and let's go back. We asked the question that it's V'aftem es Hager, and we compared it to Avos Hashem, which is Littlepeh, and we pointed out that the comparative is because it's S, but we only were, let's say, touching the surface of the problem, because the Ramban in Chumash, who makes the case that you can't say v'after le'acha kamoicha is it should be that it's kamoicha mamish, and that's hafloga, and that's why the Ramban says it's a lamid le'acha kamoicha. It's not es le'acha kamoicha. Ramban says. So once you say this, how can it say v'aftem es hager? Because the Ramban says that's hafloga. The Ramban of Vayikra Yutes Yitzayin, the Yomasa V'tam v'after hamoicha, it's hafloga. Ki lo yikabe leiv ha'odam she'aves chaveiro ki avosa yesnafshe. So what happened over here? How can you break that rule? And the Ramban is moisif in Chumash, and he says another time. It's impossible. Why? Because first of all, it's psychologically impossible. One can't love someone like they love themselves. And then halachically, it's impossible because it says So you can't be the same. And he says, oh, shekva bo Rabbi Akiva v'limed chayecha koidmin v'chayech chavcha chavercha. So if it's chayecha koidmin, do we say there's no din of chayecha koidmin by ger? Certainly not. So we're back to where we started. And the truth is, we haven't defined until this point what he's supposed to do, what he's supposed to love. He loves, if he's compared to God, we understand why it's compared to God because ואהבתם הגר, but we don't understand how what exactly happens. So what I would say is the problem of chayecha koidmin, v'ahavta lo kamoicha, is if you love him be'etzem. But here, what you're loving is a character trait. You're loving the character trait of being able to throw away everything which he had, which he was brought up with and born to, and the whole Avodah Zarah culture, the whole culture, the whole society, which goes into every crevice of man's personality, and to change himself and to say, no, I want to be with God. My sheep is to be with God. You love his sheepers, his yearning, and that you can love. And that's no steer to anything. But you're loving a part of him. So that love is not aflaga. And there's no problem with chayech koidmin, because chayech is koidmin. Now, here comes another problem. The Rambam makes a statement, which is very interesting. V'zeh mavur ain't suffik boy. Ve'eni yedei adam mimi shemona mitzvah shesikel zeh. Now let's just what the word shesikel zeh. That's Ibn Tibbet's translation. And sikel zeh is an Indian is something about kilkel. They made this kilkel. You find in Rashi in Shmuel Beis, Perek Tesvav, Pasuk Lamed Aleph, ve'eni yodea. He says that sikel is kilkel. That's what he says there. Another translation is kapach ve'eni yodea af echod mimi shemoine es HaMitzvos shenela mimenu inyan zeh. So all moine HaMitzvos. So the truth is, if you look at the Bahag has two mitzvahs, a mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael and a mitzvah of Ahavas Hager. The Bahag in Minyan Mitzvah Aseh in Kum Vaseh, Samach Vav v'after lecha kamoicha, and in Kuf Mem Aleph lahav ger tzedek. However, interesting. Rapsadia. See, this is the new Sefer HaMitzvos. See here, he has a perik chafei. This is the perik of Gerim. HaPerik ho esrim v'chamisha shar hamizgairim v'hein arba esrim mitzvos. So he has a mitzvah, page 235. V'osa lahalav esager u'lahoina isai b'dvorim k'fi she'oma v'ger lo yisaina. Okay, that's okay. But there's no mention over here of a mitzvah ta'avas again. Maybe, I'm not sure, I'm not sure if you gain anything from it. Maybe he means something because the first mitzvah, when he opens the perek and he says that Sham is guiding, he says, Osa oisam reshis dovo shnei sugim. It made them the head, the cream of the crop in two ways. Le'inyan misha ozav es akfira, the kibel es tanayu emuna. Ve'avodas Hashem, harihu ke'ezrach sheb'bnei Yisrael. K'fi she'omar ke'ezrach mikem yi Elochem hager hago itchem. So the Chayr is a separate mitzvah that the ger is like you. Good. But the thrust of the pasuk is that the ger should be equal to you. And there's nothing new. It's just a mitzvah that a ger should be equal to a regular Jew. But this is not a separate avo. You don't find it upside the good. However, he has the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael. In Perek Yud Gimel, the Perek Yud Gimel, HaPerek Yud Gimel, Chayvas Yehudi Klapa Yehudi. Klapa, and in Rishayna, She'avenu Kefi Shu'oiv As Atzmoi, Ki Oimroi V'ahavta Reach Kamoicha. So there's a mitzvah, mitzvahs of Ahavas Yisrael, and he doesn't have a mitzvah of V'ahavta Reach Kamoicha, of Ahavas Hager. So the Chayr Ram says, V'zeh Mavua ain't suffik boy, ain't Yodea Odom and me, Shemona HaMitzvah Shesikal Zeh. Well, the Chayr is the Chavsadi going. I found a similar thing. In Shirish Aleph. It says like this. Omnom Heyois Moshe Nema Loi B'Sinai. It was said to Moshe in Sinai, Sheyitzavenu ki kishiyiyeh bi'achris mamlachtenu, at the end of our malchus, v'yikra lonu im ha'yevonim kach v'kach yischayev lonu shenid nadlik ner Chanukah. Hine eini roye she'echad yidme zeh or shial machshavtei, that there was a tzivut to Moshe Rabbeinu there should be a chiyuv near Hanukkah when it happens. There's something about Hanukkah. The truth is, there is a similar thing in Rav Sadi going to what the Ram says that he can't imagine anyone saying such a thing. Whether it's the same, and that's what the Ram is referring to, I can't tell you. In Perchov, Omud, page 199, Kasher Yanchil Hashem Nitzochon Libnei Levi b'milchamoisam b'komim aleim yichabdu es oisei hazman gefi she'omar berach Hashem cheloi ufor of Yodam. He doesn't mention Hanukkah, doesn't mention Ner Hanukkah, but he's talking about the Yontif of Hanukkah. But it's that there was a seed for Moshe Rabbeinu that there's going to be such a thing. Shekasher Yanchel Hashem Nitzokon L'Bnei Levi. So you'll make a Yontif. So it's similar to what the Ram says is impossible. But he says no one said such a thing. In another place, I found that the Rambam says that someone said it, but it's Be'ilum Shem, and he disagrees. In Shiur Shvi, he says, "Ba'avur shene'elam misilasenu hasherish hazeh mona b'mitzvah soras achas esrei mitzvahs." Remember the Sfas Odom? There was the Shrin and Michvah and Baheres, and whatever we went to it. V'lo yoda ki hein mitzvah achas v'chol ma shenizka ba'kosuv omnam hu diktoku tonight. Okay, that's what we have. Okay. Now, just a little bit, and we'll just get started. And Met Hashem will pick this up next week, I guess. There's a mitzvah to matzik ltzadek the midos u'mishkolos. That's HaMitzvos hashmonu mosayim. He shetzivonu ltzadek apeles v'hamaznim mishkolos v'amidos lahaflim smsukam v'omer yis'ala moiznei tzedek avnei tzedek eifat tzedek v'hin tzedek yeh lochem. It's an amazing thing. I would have said the pshat in the pasuk yeh lochem, that you should have them, I guess. Okay. But the Ram comes in with the Sefer. V'loshen Sefer, Moznei Tzedek. Tzadek. See, Moznei Tzedek, l'chayre, is a adjective or a noun. Moznaim, weights, scales of Tzedek. Okay, and what happens is the Rambam makes the Sefer makes it almost into a verb. The Pirush Makubal, I assume. Tzadek es hamuznaim yofet. Avnei tzedek. Tzadek es hamishkolos yofet. Eifa tzedek. Tzadek es ha'eifa yofet. V'hin tzedek. Tzadek es ahin yofet. So l'cheira, there are two things you learn from this. One thing you learn that the word tzadek is, you could use the verb shetzivonu l'tzadek apeles v'hamaznim, and lahaflig b'tzimsumam l'cheira L'cheira, that is the Teres Kohanim of Yofeh. And that's the Rambam saying there's something new over here. You have to see about what this means. And the first thing we have to understand, and I just want to start with you, Lineda, and then we'll move. There are two lavim by Mishkolos. There are two lavim by Mishkolos. And there's one Aseh. And the first thing we'll have to do, Met Hashem, next week, Lineda, is to discuss what is the relationship between the two. Mitzvah loisaseh reish ayin aleph is shaloisasu over b'mishpat, b'mida, b'mishkol, b'mesura, and that is it's in Vayikra Yutes Lamed Hey, and that is to weigh or to measure with mishkalos umidos, which are false, because through this you'll end up the moichel or the koine will not get what they deserve. Another lav, shlo yeh l'cho b'kischa even bo'even v'doy l'ktana v'om chafei yud gimel, and it's an isa that to have to keep by yourself, to own it, the etzleinu midos umishkolos loy nechonos. And what it is, the Gzeira D'Aisa, Shema. He might use them as a Mido Mishko. And Yom Balav, even Mitzias, he didn't do it. And then you have this Aseh, Moisnei Tzedek, V'avnei Tzedek, V'in Tzedek. And one of the things we're going to have to do in Mitzvah Hashem and pick up is to understand what was this chadash over here in this mitzvah of Moisnei Tzedek and Avnei Tzedek. And this we'll see in Mitzvah Hashem, and this is what the Rambam is talking about over here, is where he's medayik the Teres Kohanim of Yofeh, Sadek Yofeh, lahaflig b'tzim sumo. And this in Mitzvah Hashem we'll pick up Mitzvah Hashem next week. Bli neder.